Welcome to Dekmantel Connects. My name is Dennis de Groot. I'm an artist manager and consultant. I primarily work with independent artists and help them develop their careers. And with me is...
My name is Donelle. I've been working in the music industry for around 10 years. I've done a few different jobs in that time, but I would say primarily my background has been in bookings. So organizing shows and tours internationally for a group of artists. And I sort of shifted, or I guess rather broadened, my scope of what I was doing a couple of years ago when I co-founded an artist agency called The Collective Studio. And our mission with the agency is to assist artists and performers in maybe not all aspects of their career, but multiple aspects of it. So one of the things we do is booking, label management, and especially this year, we've been focusing a lot on publishing in sync, which is, I think, why I'm here today.
Yes,
and to talk about.
That's what we're talking about. We're going to give somewhat of a primer on publishing, sync, and licensing. Try to simplify it because it's very complex. So to start, can we go into what music publishing is and why it's actually important?
Sure. It's a huge question, a super important one. And I think we're sort of diving into the deep end by approaching it that way. But I'll try to explain it in like concise and simple terms. And I think maybe one caveat before I try to explain it is that I think when talking about music publishing, there are at least a dozen or so terms that are sort of always thrown around and necessary for understanding the discussion around publishing and sync licensing. So I'm either going to try to avoid using those so that what I'm saying is accessible, or if I do say them, I'll try to, you can ask me to define or clarify what I'm saying. But I think in its essence, in its most simple terms, music publishing is the management of compositions on behalf of composers. And a bit more specifically, what I mean by management is the administration, the ownership, and the exploitation of those compositions on behalf of the composers. A publisher's main goal or main purpose is to collect royalties for the compositions which they own or represent.
And compositions being songs and composers
tracks.
being the person making the song, but not necessarily, well, the writer, producer of the song mostly.
Yeah, I think in our context, or like with the Dekmantel audience, that's producers. Could be a bedroom producer, or it could be a very established producer, but anyone that's writing music or lyrics.
Yeah. And when you have a composition, when you are a composer, basically, you there are royalties that are being collected. So how does that work basically in publishing? Like you make a song, you release a song, and then there's money being made. How do these rights work?
Okay. Let me think of the best way to begin, because that's a huge question, and there are multiple ways that royalties are collected. Yeah. There's also loads of different types of royalties which are collected via various means. Maybe the best place to begin, and hopefully what is relatable, is if you make a piece of music, or what I call a composition. I think a lot of artists, especially independent artists, they maybe don't realize, I mean, congratulations for having made a track, but they maybe don't realize the like legal significance of that. And when you've made something or you've written something, you have the copyright to it. It's I'm not a lawyer, but it's a form of intellectual property. And so there's automatically some weight that comes with that and that you have ownership over. I think it's also, like, on that point, it's really important to mention that, you know, as I've said, if you create a piece of music, you have the copyright to it. And the same applies if you sample someone's music. it's important to remember that you're also using then their piece of copyright,
Right.
which means permission has to be granted and often fees have to be paid. Same goes, I think you work with bands,
Yeah,
so
work
that
with-
you have
yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
composers and everyone has a piece of the copyright.
Yeah. I work with artists where there's usually a producer, there's usually another writer involved. So like
Yeah.
they both have parts of it, depending on, like how we release. Some stuff is self-release, so we hold all the rights.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's released through labels, which means that there's a split there. At least they have the master rights.
Yeah.
And
But I guess even all of the artists that I work with are solo independent artists. Sometimes they do collaborations, but I guess with a band, you're probably familiar with this idea, or at least a discussion needing to take place of like, okay, we've written this song together,
Yeah.
and there's the guitarist and the piano player and the vocalist, and maybe you've had discussions about like what percentage of
Yes.
that
Yeah,
copyright each
there will
person
be
holds.
like all kinds of like discussions regarding the splits, and when there's featured artists on these songs, like do they get a percentage of it, or like how do we resolve that? These are things that are like ongoing discussions, but like the main artists that I work with, it's just like a 50-50 split for them because they're like an actual band together.
Yeah, it's nice when it's straightforward.
Yes.
Or yeah, it's just an independent
Right.
artist. But yeah, it's an important thing to mention, and for artists, independent artists, collaborators to know that it's a discussion you should have with whomever you're making music with, and make sure there is an agreement before things get to further stages of release.
So basically, when you have royalties on a song, you like these royalties are collected, and a lot of artists, like especially when you're starting out, like you might make music and you might put it out. Like there's all kinds of like self-distribution platforms now where you can just put songs out, and you get paid out of like the streaming platform or the distributor, but you might not know that there are other
Yeah.
sides to it.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people might confuse what is the money that comes in via digital distribution or physical distribution as royalties, and it's actually something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a complicated way that it all works, and I don't work at or never have worked at a performing rights organization. These are the organizations. There is usually one in every country. So in the Netherlands, it's called Buma Stemra. In the UK, there's PRS. In France, there's SACEM. I think the US has 5 different
Yeah.
ones. So a lot of countries have their own performing rights organization, and that organization is responsible for collecting fees and then distributing those fees to all of the composers that are registered with them and whose music has been performed live or broadcast on television or on the radio.
Yeah. So if you're broadcasted on television, radio, or played at a festival or a bar or anything,
Yeah.
Those places typically pay a fee to that goes into these organizations,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
and they redistribute it.
Yeah, and I think to provide a bit more context, I think Dekmantel as a festival is a pretty good example of that. I mean, I also don't work for Dekmantel nor Buma Stemra, who I'm sure collects a fee from them, but every festival, I mean, it's a public performance, it's in a public space, tickets are being sold. I'm fairly certain Dekmantel has to pay a fee to Buma Stemra in order to host their festival every summer. And then however much money Buma Stemra collects from Dekmantel, then what should happen in an ideal situation is every artist whose music was played on that festival, whether it's for 3 minutes on the main stage or 15 minutes on a smaller stage, they should be getting a percentage of that money that Buma Stemra has collected. So that's why it's really important that artists understand at least a bit how the whole infrastructure works. Because I feel pretty strongly that the more artists that are engaged with this and that are aware of how it works and making sure they're registered with a performing rights organization, and especially if they're a performer, if they're making sure to register their performances and maybe even the exact tracks that they played during that performance, the whole system can become much more efficient
Right.
and accurate. Because, for example, if you did create a great track, it was played on the main stage at Dekmantel. Dekmantel's paid this fee, but you're not registered at a performing rights
Right.
organization. There's no way for that money, which is yours, to reach
go
you.
to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not as straightforward as everybody that is played is receiving their percentage. It goes into a basically like a main collection, and it's distributed to everybody who's registered instead of
Yeah.
like you said, like if you're not registered, you're not receiving your share.
Yeah. That's essentially how it works, but it's also, I think, different in every territory. So I
Yeah.
don't want to speak broadly. And I know also, especially in the Netherlands, with Buma Stemra, they are making moves to utilize technology and have performances monitored and actually sort of pay per play. I mean, the industry is still very far away from this, but there are technological advances which are allowing performing rights organizations to become, I think, I would say, more accurate in how
Right.
that money is being distributed. But I think what you're also referring to, and which is maybe pretty infamous, is like this black box of money that is collected.
That doesn't
And-
have a place to go.
Yeah, they don't know how
Yeah.
to distribute it. So in that case, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it. And like I said, every PRO is different. And I think people should feel free to check the website or send an email, call the PRO that they're registered with to try to understand how that process works where
'Cause
they are.
Just to clarify that once you are registered, you basically get a statement that does specify where you were played and
Yeah.
how much, like how much that turns into, like as far as financial compensation.
Yeah. Like things such as like radio stations might be listed, or television broadcasters, or certain performances. It should be listed on your statement. But again, I think statements probably vary from country to country, and I'm not sure how transparent all of them are.
So you talked a little about like when you make a track, you automatically hold copyright. There is, of course, when a track is finished, there are different rights to it. Can we discuss like the difference between master and publishing rights?
Yeah, definitely. There are loads of different types of rights involved, but master and publishing are the two you're going to hear a
Yeah.
lot, and which I would probably say are most essential for an independent artist to understand and know when they're maybe giving that away or what they want to hold on to. So master right refers to the master recording, and this is really essential because it's not referring to the composition
Right.
itself that you've written or performed, but it's referring to the actual recording of it. This one instance of when you performed it in a studio or, I don't know, recorded it in your bedroom. That's what the master right is referring to. And historically, labels hold the master right. And this maybe isn't so relevant now, especially with independent artists, but typically it was the label that was paying for the recording process.
Right.
They were maybe giving in advance, or
Giving
they
studio
were
time.
yeah, paying for the studio, paying for instruments, paying for session musicians. So they funded this
Yeah.
recording process, and they typically held or hold the master
Right.
recording. It's probably going to, if you're presented with an agreement to release your music on a label, you're probably also going to see that they are holding the master rights
Right.
as well. But I would say, especially if it's music you've made totally funded by yourself in your own studio or in your own home, I think there is an argument there today for artists to maintain
Yeah.
more of their master right than what may like historically have been the way things were done. So that's the one side. And then the other side is the publishing side. And the publishing rights are yours as an artist until or unless you've signed a publishing agreement with a publisher. So I think that's also quite important for people to understand, because there is a lot a publisher can do for an artist, and I would say they're pretty essential. But if you don't have a publisher, it's not like everything we're talking about is irrelevant for you. It mostly means that
you do it yourself.
Yeah, you have those things yourself. And I think really understanding this master side and this publishing side becomes quite important when we're probably going to talk about sync licensing later, because you'll often, the way you're presented with an offer is often a certain fee for the master side and a certain fee for the publishing side. So it's good that an artist understands that, so they know how much they might really take away from something.
Yeah, and in terms of the master rights, like what's also very common these days on the artist side is when you sign with independent labels, or when you sign with distributors or something where there is an investment coming from that party, where they, for example, invest in your marketing, or they invest in your music videos or whatever, they often try to negotiate the master rights, or at least try to license them for a set number of years. Where traditionally, like you said, the labels would pay for the recording, would facilitate everything. Now there's a lot of people just making music at home in their bedroom from start to finish. So the label or distributor doesn't have any leverage there anymore. So one of the things that's done a lot now is saying, like, okay, we're investing in you as an artist. We're helping, make your music bigger by promoting it, by giving you a marketing budget, by having like a social media team on it and everything. And in exchange for that, we either take your master rights or license them.
Okay, so you're saying in your experience, they've kind of stopped talking about the recording itself, but then have pushed it to this like marketing career advancement side.
There are major labels that will still talk about the recording process. Like once you've signed, they will facilitate like a better studio with engineers and get a better mix and mastering and everything done for you. And in that way, they will have that leverage. But a lot of times I see nowadays that there's like at least a licensing on the master rights.
Okay. And have you seen that labels you've been working with, they're offering advances? Yeah,
they'll offer like not like huge advances, but they'll offer advances, and that like you can guess, like the bigger the advance is, the more they want to take from you.
Yeah, the bigger the commitment.
So so like when they do offer an advance, there will be at least like an ask to license your master rights, for example, and then they'll license them for 15 or 25 years or whatever. And in exchange you get like investments in your work.
But you found there's room to negotiate?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Not always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see. So we've discussed the master rights. We've discussed the publishing rights. So when your music is being streamed, how does that work with the master rights and the publishing rights? Like where does the money go?
Yeah. Well, streaming and like anything happening online is a pretty complicated topic on its own, and especially when you try to talk about it in relation to royalties, because the system, I would say, is pretty archaic. This royalties and rights, this was all sort of established way before there was the internet or streaming. So we are trying to adapt these more, what I would say, archaic models to fit online usage, but it's not straightforward. There's a lot I could talk about, but I think if we're going to look at streaming and the sorts of royalties and rights involved with that, the two most relevant ones to talk about in relation to streaming are mechanical royalties and performing rights royalties. I would say to frame the discussion that way, then maybe more so about master and publishing. And mechanical royalties and performing rights royalties are something which are collected by a performing rights organization, so like Buma Stemra in the Netherlands that I mentioned. And in its most simple terms, mechanical royalties refer to royalties collected for the physical reproduction of your music. So historically, that was pressing your record on vinyl or CDs or VHS. That's what mechanical royalties refers to. We've had to adapt that term to now also include things
streams, yes,
that happen online. So if your track is purchased and downloaded on iTunes, I think that also falls under mechanicals, because that's like a digital reproduction going to someone. And the same with streams. Every time it's played. So that's the mechanical side. And then on the performing rights side, we're referring more to when the music is broadcast. So like the example I gave earlier with Dekmantel Festival, when your music is played at a festival or played on the radio or played on television as part of a TV advertisement. That's the performing royalties side, but streaming and online usage also falls a bit under this as well, or rather, like, we've had to adapt this definition of what performing royalties are to also include for this online usage. I think I maybe still haven't gotten to the essence of your question, but I felt like that was essential background information to even understand how it is that these performing rights organizations are then going to collect these two types of royalties from your online usage. And I mean, as far as I understand, performing rights organizations have agreements and relationships with things like YouTube and Spotify and Facebook. And in the same way that a bar or a concert hall or a festival is paying a fee to Buma Stemra, so are these online platforms.
Yeah.
And that's how money is collected and then hopefully distributed.
Reaches you. Yes. Yeah. So basically you make a song. We've discussed what rights you have when you make a song and whether you release a song through a label or whatever. So one thing that is currently talked about a lot and that a lot of people, want to learn more about is licensing and synchronization. So
yeah, that's the interesting part.
Yes.
I mean, I think what we talked about prior is essential, but for me at least, this is the more exciting fun
and you
part.
need to know what we talked about prior to understand what happens when your music is being licensed or synced.
Yeah.
So how can we give a simple explanation of what that is?
I hope it's pretty straightforward. I think if you just think about your daily life and every time you turn on the television or even before we got here scrolling through Instagram, there is often music which is used in, I would say, almost every advertisement you see on TV. There's music, unless it's a silent film, or even in silent films there is music, there's not talking. So music accompanies all kinds of things: advertisements, video games, film, television. And synchronization just refers to the process of syncing music to moving image. So that's what synchronization is. And yeah, every time someone does this, if it's for commercial use or public use, permission has to be granted by the people that hold the rights to that piece of music.
And that's the master rights. It's two sides to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, usually, say an auto company writes to you or your manager saying, we'd like to use your song in this upcoming car commercial campaign that we're doing. I mean, in my experience, usually what they will say is, we can offer 1,000 euros on the master side and 1,000 euros for the publishing. And it's the person who wants, or the client or the brand, whoever that wants to use your music, it's their responsibility to make sure that they are in touch with all of the rights holders, because oftentimes there can be many.
Right. And so there is a advantage if you own both sides.
Definitely. Have you seen this in your experience?
Yes,
Because I see it all the time.
we own both sides, so like whenever we do get an offer for sync, it's pretty straightforward. We just look at the offer and
Yeah.
either say yes or no and renegotiate. But it usually ends up being the same on both sides
Yeah.
for us. So it's very straightforward. And I can imagine that if you don't, for example, own a master, it can be a lot more complicated.
Yeah, it's just, I'm sure people love working with you because it's a one-stop shop.
Right.
It's probably pretty easy, quick, efficient communication. But yeah, if there are multiple rights holders involved, multiple composers or labels, whatever, publishers, whatever it may be, each of those parties has to give their permission for, I don't know, their 6% of that
Right.
composition. But also, my experience is more like yours because I actually don't work with bands. All of the artists I work with it's just them. And aside from their work with me and the collective studio, like they're rather independent. So it's also usually quite easy that there aren't a bunch of other publishers or composers involved. And when speaking to a client, I'm usually in a position to give permission on behalf of both the master and the publishing side because the artist has it, or I'm the publisher for it. The collective studio is the publisher for it.
And do you experience like commissions as well? Because like there's of course two sides. There's one where they want to license a existing song for like a commercial or film or whatever. But sometimes of course they also want like something very specific, or they'll come to an artist or producer specifically for something.
Yeah. I definitely have experience with both, and I would say in my case, I guess it's almost been about 50-50. Maybe it's been a bit heavier on the side of clients reaching out and needing an original piece of music for something, because I mean typically still in a lot of film and television and advertising, clients are wanting really popular
Songs.
yeah,
or
known
music,
songs,
yes.
which that's not the type of catalog
Yeah.
I represent.
Same.
But I will also say I've been, in the short time that I've been doing this work, I've been pretty pleasantly surprised by how engaged certain brands are with what I would say is underground, more niche music. And I've definitely had brands reach out for something that in our catalog that I thought no one knew.
Right.
And that's been pretty exciting. But yeah, I would say at least half in my experience is also, you know, there are around 20 composers that we represent, and some of the people we've worked with regularly know that, and they might know they have an upcoming campaign for which they need music, and they'll say, they'll send a brief, they'll say, this is the type of sound we need. Do you have somebody that can make
Right.
it? So that's a good portion of what I do as well. Have you done both?
Yes, and like, but so in my experience, I was just gonna talk about that, like how, you know, the main question a lot of people will have is like, how do we land a sync? And in my experience, what it's often been is we have landed music on television shows or films where there's a music supervisor that's working on the team of the show or the film, who, like you said, is really in touch with what's going on musically in the underground or whatever.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that basically make a wish list of what they want. And then the team reaches out trying to get certain songs. So like we've landed songs on a TV show earlier this year where they were very specific about the song. They send us the scene description of where it's going to be, and then it's, you know, the offers with it or whether or not we want to do it. But there have been times where they've reached out to me asking for like a piece of music, and then often that is based on something existing too. It will be like, oh,
Usually something they couldn't afford.
yeah, like,
That they then
well, it's
make
either
it.
that or in my experience, I've also had where they will reach out and they say like, I really like this song of yours, but can you make something more like that, or even like an edit of an existing song?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it is great when an offer just comes in out of the blue for something that's already in your catalog or that you already
Right.
represent, and then you're really just there to like negotiate the terms of it. So that's great, and if anyone listening has had that happen to them, they should congratulate themselves,
Right.
because that's
That's
great.
the best
Um,
possibility.
Yeah, and I love it when that happens. But mostly my day-to-day work is like proactively trying to build relationships with music supervisors, or just maintain
Yeah.
relationships with music supervisors or brands or whatever, and share new music, keep our catalog and our composers on their radar, and to hear what they're working on and what they might need music for.
So when you receive an offer, what do you look for in it? What's the most important things to look for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think, at least, yeah, there are details that have to be gathered to know what sort of fee you should ask for. And yeah, also just to know how your music is going to be used, and
Right.
what you're granting them permission for, or what you might be selling to them or giving away. For me, the most important thing is context. So where is the piece of music going to be placed? Like, are we talking about an advertisement? Are we talking about a video game? How long is it going to be used for? Do you want 15 seconds or do you want 3 minutes? And then how long would you like to use it for, in the sense of like the term? Is this a commercial that is going to air for 3 months, or is it going to air for 3 years?
Right.
Is it going to air only in the Netherlands, or Europe-wide, or worldwide? So territory is really important, term, the context. Yeah, those are all the things. I mean, it can also be hard to gather these details. They often don't want to give them all, but definitely the more information you can have, the better, because then you can request fair compensation. And like I said, yeah, just also know, it hasn't happened in my experience, but I can certainly imagine a scenario in the future where a client reaches out and wants to use a piece of music, and maybe that client is like an alcoholic beverage brand or something, and for some reason that artist isn't comfortable with their music
Right.
being used in that circumstance. So it's important to know and make a decision based on as many factors as you
Yeah.
can gather.
That so I got an offer for a TV show where the scene description was like an explicit scene, like a sex scene, where we had to really think about, like, does this song fit that scene as it was described, because it wasn't shot yet, so we had to really figure out, like, if this is something we wanted to do. Ended up saying yes, and ended up not being as explicit as described.
Okay.
But like that's an example of not being sure if you want your music used in that way. And like you said, like alcoholic beverages, cigarette brands, like there are certain usages where you might want to think about whether you want to do it or not.
Yeah, because it really lives on. And I guess it's interesting in your case, because it sounds like you and the artist were even considering the usage of the music almost more like on a curatorial,
Yeah.
creative level. You had some concern to make sure it was the right fit, even though typically that you would say like that's the role of the music supervisor. But I think it's great if you're also engaged about in that process.
Yeah, and there's like there is this aspect to it, especially when it comes to TV or film, I think, where the artist has there's thought behind the song. Like there is a reason why they made it. Sometimes the lyrics speak to certain things, and if the music supervisor picks a song just based on the feel of it, it may not necessarily fit what they picked. So I always want to make sure that the artist at least is comfortable with it.
Yeah,
and,
I also
and comfortable seeing it back in these usages.
Yeah, the ideal scenario is definitely to see the actual video that it's going to be placed under. Sometimes that's not finalized yet, or you can see a rough cut, or they'll say, we can't share it with you yet, it's not ready. But that's ideal, is to see exactly the moving image that it's going to be used alongside with.
So in the world we're currently living in the middle of a pandemic, I can imagine that most of your work is in in licensing sync right now.
Definitely this year.
And do you feel that for independent artists, that's like if there's a specific market for them, and if it's easy for them to break into?
I don't know if it's easy to break into, but I definitely think there is a huge market out there and an appetite for music. I mean, like I was saying earlier, you see it, everything you watch on TV has music underneath it. Even on Instagram, ads have music behind them. So there's plenty of moving images which require music, but whether it's easy to get your music placed there, I don't know. I think that's where the help of a sync manager or a publisher comes in, or if you're lucky enough on your own to just have some relationships with music supervisors, or maybe you have friends that work
at agencies or
or maybe directly like at a fashion brand. Maybe I think a lot of brands now I'm seeing are kind of taking that creative direction in-house. I mean, I still work with a lot of creative agencies that are working on behalf of a client or a brand, but I've also had brands reach out directly and take care of that licensing themselves. So if you're someone that likes to network, or maybe you live in a city that's really good for it, like LA, or I mean, actually, to be fair, Amsterdam I think is quite
a good one. I think Amsterdam is good. LA, New York, London.
Yeah. So
any city with lots of agencies, like advertising agencies, it's usually, well, it requires a lot of networking, like you said, but there are opportunities out there.
How is it, like, do you as a manager take care of, are you trying to develop those relationships yourself, or have you signed with like a sync agent or a publisher that's doing it for you?
I do sign my artists with sync agents / publishers usually, to have it all taken care of by one party, but I also actively connect with music supervisors. Also because there's a lot of, like in the type of music I work with, there's a lot of music supervisors that I meet randomly, and we're very much into the same music, so we exchange things. But like I actively send out music to them and try to keep their attention and talk about the projects they're working on and see if there's a fit there.
Yeah.
And I think in like we see this year, it's very important to diversify as an artist. And like with touring not being a possibility, people are seeing that more than ever you need to have income streams elsewhere.
Yeah.
So sync is like, you can't really survive off of streams alone.
No, and I think this year has taught us that you can't have all of your eggs in one basket.
Right.
So it's also not to say like, well, just focus all of your efforts on sync licensing and try to get all of your income that way. I still think it might not be a lot of money, but if you are taking care of registering your music, being registered yourself as a composer, and collecting your royalties, that is just a regular, stable income that will always be there. Every year, every quarter, performing rights organizations are collecting those fees from festivals and television
And they're collecting
stations.
them anyway, so if you don't register, you're basically missing out on it.
Yeah, you are. And I think, so for me, that's, as much as I like sync and licensing, and it's certainly, I think, sustained my company and a lot of our artists this year, I still am very much about the approach of covering as much territory and you can. And even if it's only, I don't know, 75 euros a month that you get from royalties, that doesn't mean you should miss out on it.
Right.
So royalties, digital distribution, physical distribution, syncs, touring,
merchandise,
label,
everything.
Like I would say if you're interested in it, like do it all.
Right.
Yeah.
This is like, it's an extremely complex subject, but I just want to say, like, I think artists should do some research, look into this as much as they can, connect with sync agencies, connect with publishers, and look into this, because it's an important part to cover in your career.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know the dialogue around these topics is often complicated and seems inaccessible. But I mean, part of the reason us talking today is hopefully to
Right.
make it a bit more accessible. And it is probably easier if you can find a manager or a publisher or a sync agent to help you look after these things. But I think also I absolutely want it to be known that if an independent artist can also do it themselves, with just a basic bit of information. So, I mean, I'm happy when people reach out to, there's loads of books and blogs
Right.
and recordings like this on the topic, and I'm always happy to share that information. So I think people should feel it. You don't have to be an artist that I look after or someone
Right.
that's on our roster. It's a huge part of what we want as an agency is to just educate independent artists more broadly, because like I was saying earlier, I think the more artists that are engaged with this topic and looking after their rights and their administration, the better the whole ecosystem will become,
Yes.
the more accurate and fair it will become.
So the first step for everybody is to register.
Yes, register yourself, then register your music. If you're a performer, register your performances and the set lists that go along with them.
That's especially something that's often forgotten.
People don't know.
Yes.
Most DJs,
Don't
producers
know. Yes.
do not know. And of course, I mean, yeah, just a little side note, but this is another aspect of like having a stable, diversified income. You might be doing super well as a touring DJ, making $2,000 a show and you're playing 3 shows a weekend, which is great. But you can also collect the royalties from the, if you're playing your own music.
Right.
I shouldn't assume that every DJ is also producing their own music and
Right.
playing their own tracks. But if you are, there are these royalties to be collected. And that nightclub you played yesterday, they're paying a fee to the performing rights organization in that country. So you might as well also collect the royalties for, I don't know, for the 15 minutes that your own productions were being played.
Yes.
It might not even begin to compare to the fee you're getting as like a flat artist fee, but you can never predict what's going to
Where it
happen
goes.
or if touring is going to stop.
Right.
And so it's great to just have your bases covered. And yeah, like I guess we're kind of a broken record now, but this money is being collected anyways. So you might as well get what is yours.
I think on that note, we have a good closer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.